Hi, I'm Dan Lagani with Silver Solutions, the senior-focused home services company. On today's episode of AgeWise, the show designed to make you smarter about all the things you'll need to know as your parents and loved ones grow older, we talk about hoarding. What is it and how to treat it? With our guest, Dr. Gail Steketee. She's the Dean and Professor Emerita at the Boston University School of Social Work and an expert on the subject with many published papers and several books, including Buried Treasures and Hoarding, Everything You Need to Know About It. Dr. Steketee, thanks so much for joining us on today's show.
Glad to be here.
So let's start with a very basic definition of hoarding. We hear about it from a television show and people throw the word around. But in your world, what is the definition of a hoarder?
Well, first, we wouldn't use the word hoarder, just so you know. We would talk about someone who had hoarding disorder if they qualified for the disorder, or someone who had problems with hoarding or hoarding problems. And so the defining features are difficulty parting with possessions that then accumulate because they are disorganized and ill-kept, if you will, and they end up as piles of clutter around the home that interfere with the person's ability to use their home as it was intended. So if it doesn't interfere with everyday living, then it's not really a hoarding problem or certainly not hoarding disorder.
So those of us that may have grown up with a mom or dad that filled the garage with things, but the car could still be parked there, that doesn't then meet the classic definition that you just gave.
No, and the garage alone would not do it, even if that were cluttered and you couldn't put your car in. And I have to say, from my own neighborhood, I don't think there are a lot of people who are putting their cars in their garages. But unless it interferes with the living areas, so the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, the bedrooms, that would be what would cause us to be concerned about a hoarding problem.
By what you've described, how big of an issue is it in the United States? I've seen statistics that range from 1.5% to 2.5%, but how much of the population actually has clinically defined hoarding disorder?
The number is probably around 2.5%. It's hard to know exactly what is the right percentage, and these studies, epidemiology studies, have been done in the U.S. and also abroad, mainly in the Western countries, Europe, and so forth. And the range is somewhere between 1 and even up to 6%. So when it all settles out, we're probably in the 2 to 3% range. But that's a lot of people if you think about it. It means that if you know 100 people, at least 2 of them are likely to have hoarding, although you might not know who those 2 people are.
And does it cross all geographies and all socioeconomic groups, or is it limited to certain groups that are more predisposed?
It is across the spectrum. So we have met and known people who are quite wealthy and have a serious hoarding problem because they can't let go of possessions that are really in the way and making life very difficult for them. But it's more common probably in people of lower socioeconomic status, but it's a chicken and egg problem. So is it that the hoarding is causing interference and then people are not earning or able to work well and so forth? Or is it because they are poorer and somehow have more difficulty with it? The fact that it crosses the whole spectrum just suggests to us that it doesn't really respect the socioeconomic ability of a person.
We see it in our company through the lens of seniors, since that's what our focus is. And my question is it age specific, or do you see it manifest in seniors because it's progressive and over time, the amount of accumulation in a home simply builds up? What's your perspective on that?
Our sense is that it builds up over time because we know from pretty consistent information out there, research studies, that it begins in the late teen years, mid to late teens, or up into the early 20s. And that's the beginning for almost everybody. So the fact that we see it in middle-aged and older adults just means that it had to get worse over time for them to be interested in seeking some help for it or being identified as having a problem.
So When you think about your own experiences as an educator and as a researcher on the topic, what's changed over time? And I guess most fundamentally, when you started, it was not even defined as its own disorder. Is that correct?
That's certainly correct. We're pretty pleased to have been part of the effort to do enough research to understand the problem so that we could define it clearly. The field has changed a good bit in that now we're trying to get into more of the details of why this attachment to your stuff. What is it that actually drives that? We have a pretty good handle on how it works over time in a person's life, and mostly we know what to do to help them get over it, but there's a long way to go to really help people get completely over it.
And it seems like from everything that I've read and even other interviews that I've seen with you, there are other contributing issues that are present with people with hoarding disorder. Some of them like OCD, depression, attention deficit challenges. What are all of the factors that you come across when you find someone that is a classic case of someone with hoarding disorder?
In the mental health arena, the most prominent is definitely depression. We see it in a good third to half of people who will have what we call major depression, which means it's a significant depressive experience for people. The next most common are probably social phobia or social anxiety. About a third of people have that. And another third have generalized anxiety disorder. They worry a lot and at a level that really does impair their ability to move forward in life. The other problem that we see a good bit of is attention deficit disorder. We don't see hyperactivity very much. It's the attentional problem that hangs people up and probably contributes to the clutter.
Now, having heard your descriptions and all of the other contributing factors or the confluence of other challenges that someone may face, it doesn't seem simple. It doesn't seem like it's something that is done in a 30-minute episode of a television show. So what are the treatments?
Well, the treatment that we have right now is called cognitive behavior therapy. It is specifically designed for people with hoarding disorders. So this is my colleague Randy Frost and I worked hard after we began to understand what was going on for people. We designed the treatment to work on the beliefs that people have about objects and their relationship to objects. We work on the everyday behavior toward objects. What, are they able to sort? Do they have the skills they need in order to manage clutter and keeping things in a way they can find them? And we also work hard on acquisition. So people acquire a lot of things. They go out on trash day or they go to garage sales or their special favorite shops and so forth. And one of the most important things we can do at the very beginning of treatment is to stop that accumulation of new things, because otherwise we have them coming in one door while we're trying to help people get them out the other door. So that's an important piece of it. And for those things, that and learning how to let go of objects, it's practice, practice, practice.
The kinds of calls we get on a regular basis are, my mom, who is 78 years old, can't move around in her apartment anymore, and I'm concerned she's going to fall. So you have the immediate concerns about personal safety combined with the challenge of getting someone to let go. So where's the right balance for the family member that is listening to us that has a mom or a dad or a loved one that's in an unsafe environment?
So if safety is an issue and the person is truly at risk, and you've mentioned one of the things, one is falling because they can't navigate through without stumbling over things. Sometimes they have stairs and the stairs are completely cluttered. Another one is that they've piled things so high that they can fall on top of them. And there are unfortunately people who've died that way. So when those things are present, we have to first decide what are the highest risk situations and move forward with a conversation first with the person, respecting their wish to keep their things, but telling them in very clear terms that something has to be done within a time frame that makes sense. Now, sometimes it's within the week. We are going to have to clear a path to that window because you can't be here in this heat without being able to air the place out. Sometimes it's that there's an infestation of something that's dangerous for them. We have mice or we have bed bugs or something like that, and we're going to have to clear out a lot of stuff to do that. So that's a hard conversation, but must be had, and then a time frame set and a strategy for how to solve that safety problem.
Back to the issue of behavioral change for longer-term success. I've heard you refer to in the past coaches or organizers or other influences that can be brought to bear to help support the behavioral change. As a family member who's struggling with this with a loved one, what are the things that they can do to help reinforce along the way so that the change takes root and doesn't simply, as you said earlier, start to bring things back in the other side?
It's absolutely crucial to think through who can help the person who has a hoarding problem. And sometimes it's a family member, but the family member has to be a person with whom they don't have routine conflicts, someone who's easygoing, can help them stay on task, can keep the progress guided a little bit without offending them so that they can keep going forward. Sometimes there's no family member that can quite play that role because they're so fed up at that point. And when that's the case, then think carefully about, are there other family members? Are there neighbors? Are there friends? Should they call in someone from social service who has skills? And actually the Department on Aging and the area arrangements, local departments can be very helpful, and I'm sure your own organization is one of those, where there would be a person in the organization who is accustomed to working with clients and can help them stay on task, keep the goal in front of them, like clearing the path to the window, making sure the door can open fully, moving away the items that are on the stairwell so that there's no danger of falling, and can do so with empathy and compassion, but also firmness.
We haven't talked at all about medication, and these days we seem to live in a world where so much is dealt with a prescription medication. Is that at all on the table for people with hoarding disorder?
There are medications. Sometimes mainly there are two that have been used to treat OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and also depression that seem to be helpful. But they are only helpful in a limited way. And unfortunately, what they don't do is they don't foster the learning that people need to come away with about how to think about and use and process and manage their possessions. So that's, I think what we're seeing there is that some of that is likely that we've resolved some of the depressive emotional experiences, but we haven't really worked on the hoarding.
So we've talked about other disorders and cognitive challenges that people have, whether it's depression or attention deficit. Why does it seem like there's still more of a stigma attached to hoarding?
I don't know if there's more of a stigma attached to hoarding than there is, for example, to admitting that you have a problem with depression or a problem with attention deficit and you need medications or help from a psychiatrist or psychologist or social worker. It's interesting because I think the media has portrayed hoarding in a way that is sometimes problematic and sometimes helpful. So it brought the problem to light. You can see it on TV shows on a regular basis. But unfortunately, what often appears in the TV shows are the more extreme cases, or someone who's willing to be seen on TV, which doesn't represent the majority of people I know with a hoarding problem, who are very uncomfortable having it known, and they would never invite someone into their home that they thought would in any way be judgmental. They're embarrassed by it. So it makes some sense to me that their embarrassment is not surprising, because we are a social culture.
One last question. Are there triggers that we should be watching for along the way? And what I mean by that, as you said, it's very often a progressive disorder. But in the community that we work in with older adults, are there things that we should be watching for that may set off the problem down a more difficult path?
I would say that the death or loss of a loved one is going to be a trigger for many people. It's going to be especially difficult if the person has left them things that they need to deal with. So when you lose a spouse, you have to make decisions about what to do with their things. And many people don't do anything for a little while, which is fine. But if 5 years later, all the clothes are still in the closet, then we have a problem. So I would say loss is a big issue for people and could well provoke a mild collecting, saving problem into a hoarding problem.
Dr. Gail Steketee, thank you so much, Dean and Professor Emerita at Boston University's School of Social Work. Today on AgeWise, you help take a very complicated topic and make it more understandable and to smash the myths around the 30-minute television solution. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dan Lagani. For all of us here at AgeWise, if you like today's episode, please share it with a friend. And if you want to see back episodes, just visit our website, silversolutions.com, and go to the video tab to find out more. For all of us here that work hard every day to help make growing older safer and easier for everyone in the whole family, thanks again. Stay safe and be wise.